Then the session was done. They rose and looked at each other, the same unanswered questions on each man's face. There were forced smiles and handshakes. They were ready now. "Phil," the general said, and took him aside. "Sir?" "Phil, you feel all right, don't you, son?" "Yes, sir, I feel fine. Why?" "Phil, I've spent nearly every day with you for 3 years. I know you better than I know myself in many ways, and I've studied the psychologist's reports on you carefully. Maybe it's just nervousness, Phil, but I think there's something wrong. Is there?" "No, sir, there's nothing wrong," Phil said, but his voice didn't carry conviction. He reached for a cigarette. "Phil, if there is anything at all, you know what it might mean. You've got to be in the best mental and physical condition of your life tonight. You know better than any man here what that means to our success. I think there is something more than just natural apprehension wrong with you. Want to tell me?" Outside, the takeoff zone crawled with men and machines at the base of the rocket. For 10 hours the final checkouts had been in progress, and now the men were checking again, on their own time. The thing they had worked toward for 6 years was ready to happen, and each one felt that he was sending just a little bit of himself into the sky. Beyond the ring of lights and moving men, on the edge of the field, Mary stood. Her hands moved slowly over the top of the fence, twisting the barbs of wire, but her eyes were on the ship. And then they were ready. A small group of excited men came out from the administration building and moved forward. The checkout crews climbed into their machines and drove back outside the takeoff zone. And alone, one man climbed the steel ladder up the side of the rocket, 90 feet into the air. At the top he waved to the men on the ground, and then disappeared through a small port. Mary waved to him. "Goodbye," she said to herself, but the words stuck tight in her throat. The small group at the base of the ship turned and walked back to the fence. And for an eternity the great ship stood alone, waiting. Then, from deep inside, a rumble came, increasing in volume to a gigantic roar that shook the earth and tore at the ears. Slowly, the first manned rocket to the moon lifted up and up to the sky. For a long time after the rocket had become a tiny speck of light in the heavens, she stood holding her face in her hands and crying softly to herself. And then she felt the touch of a hand on her arm. She turned. "Phil! Oh, Phil!" She held tightly to him and repeated his name over and over. "They wouldn't let me go, Mary," he said finally. "The general would not let me go." She looked at him. His face was drawn tight, and there were tears on his cheeks. "Thank God," she said. "It doesn't matter, darling. The only thing that matters is you didn't go." "You're right, Mary," he said. His voice was low, so low she could hardly hear him. "It doesn't matter. Nothing matters now." He stood with his hands at his sides, watching her, and then turned away and walked toward the car. End of Breakaway.